Next, it is my very distinct honor to introduce Robert C. McFarlane. As they used to say in Moscow, it is no accident that IWP is honoring Bud McFarlane. Bud was my boss at the National Security Council. He was the President's National Security Advisor and helped change the course of history, specifically by developing the strategies that led to victory in the Cold War. Bud's entire life has been devoted to the defense of our country. A Naval Academy graduate, he was a Marine officer with 2 combat tours in Vietnam, earning a Bronze Star and the Navy Commendation Medal. He was the first Marine to become a White House Fellow, a rare and competitive privilege. He served as military assistant to National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger and Special Assistant for National Security Affairs to President Gerald Ford. Subsequently, at the National War College, he co-authored a book on crisis management, combining national security practice with scholarship, an ideal that we prize here at IWP as we choose our faculty exactly according to this standard. Bud then served as a top legislative aide to Senate Armed Services Committee Chairman John Tower at a critical point in legislative executive, the history of legislative executive relations concerning foreign and national security policy. He helped spearhead the bipartisan critique of the weak national security policies of the previous several years, particularly the détente policy toward the USSR. That policy had resulted in the retreat of American global influence and in communist takeovers in Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Afghanistan, Mozambique, Angola, Somalia, Ethiopia, Grenada, Nicaragua, and in pro-Soviet coups in several other countries. Bud paved the way in the highest political circles in Washington for a new approach to the Cold War. He wrote a large part of the national security platform for Ronald Reagan's presidential campaign. His first appointment in the Reagan administration was as counselor in the State Department, one of the highest executive positions there. He served as special representative to the Middle East, deputy national security advisor to President Reagan, and in 1983, at the height of Cold War tensions, he was appointed national security advisor to the president. There are so many achievements that he made in that job. I cannot list them all, so I will just choose to point out a couple of things that I think were of truly national and world historical importance. Bud was deeply involved in launching the Strategic Defense Initiative, the building of defenses against nuclear missiles, and the rejection of the doctrine of mutual assured destruction. Bud championed the key moral dimension of strategic defense. It involved building a shield to save lives and not simply reliance on retaliation. Of course, strategic defense would strengthen deterrence. The Kremlin could no longer be certain that it could destroy all our nuclear weapons in a first debilitating strike. Strategic defense had another impact. It trumped Moscow's strategy of nuclear blackmail, and it revealed that the Kremlin was losing military technological competitiveness. That forced Moscow to choose between internal economic reforms or seeking a Western economic and technological bailout. They had to choose the bailout. And to get that bailout, the Kremlin could no longer be seen as ruthlessly crushing popular dissent. So the peoples of the Soviet Empire saw an opportunity to take to the streets. Bud made heroic efforts to help sustain the anti-communist resistance in Afghanistan and in Central America, at a time when powerful interests on Capitol Hill believed that we were on the wrong side of history in Central America, and that we should have supported the forces of revolution there. But who were those forces of revolution? They portrayed themselves as innocent agrarian reformers who were setting up daycare centers in the countryside. In reality, they were communist revolutionaries who were heavily supported by Moscow and Cuba. And who supported the anti-communist resistance there? Well, one apparently unlikely candidate was none other than the Solidarity trade union movement in Poland, which stole Soviet arms from Soviet munitions depots in Poland, shipped them to the Nicaraguan resistance. The Solidarity Union believed that there would be no freedom in Warsaw until there was freedom in Managua. When the anti-communist forces in Afghanistan and Central America could show the world that they could succeed on their own, it sent the peoples of the Soviet Empire a huge message. Resistance to communism was not futile. It was Bud McFarlane and his efforts in this cause that were on the right side of history. Bud's myriad of contributions to the security of the United States and the free world involved intimate knowledge of the many arts of statecraft. He comes as close as one can be to the ideal integrated strategist. He was one of the key architects of that victory that did not necessitate direct war with the USSR. He has served his whole life a cause higher than himself, with distinction, honor, courage, humility, and patriotism. He is the model of what I want you, graduates, to turn out to be. We are honored to be in his presence. Bud. I think we can just let it hang. Yeah, that'll be fine.
I've got the right one.
Okay, good. Jack, come on over to the photo. Floor is yours, sir.
John, I can't adequately express the respect and gratitude that I feel. We were colleagues, and you were the right hand of the president in bringing down Marxism and ending the Cold War. Today, you students here are in the company of a giant, literally as figuratively. And two others properly honored also colleagues here. Ed Rowney. I don't know how you capture the breadth and depth of what it means to be a patriot and to have served your country in 3 wars, to have led men and women in combat and been victorious, to have taught young soldiers, to have been counsel to presidents, as Ken and Ed have been. I have to say, John, that your own remarks, I'd encourage you to give everybody in this audience, especially the students, graduates, a copy, for you captured truly in them what can serve as a creed and a precept for the conduct of your lives forevermore. A grasp of our founding principles, as well as how to go about expressing the personal discipline, scholarship, in the practice of statecraft in service to your country. Needless to say, whatever I might have to say today is inadequate in the shadow of Ed Rowney, Ken DeGraff, and Reed, John Lanchowski. It is often said by pundits, really, that commencements represent a kind of an unfortunate collision between the young and passionate with the old and irrelevant. Other people say that commencements represent this perennial celebration in the United States of the triumph of hope over experience. May it ever be so. For me personally, sharing this launching, this personal launching for each of you, is a moment of profound joy to me. For you provide the living evidence that as surely as in 1776, 1863, 1980, and today, that when a generation launches its career in a time of great stress, it has sufficient memory of the better days we've enjoyed to awaken us from slumber and help enkindle in us a renewal of that sense of gratitude for being an American, patriotism, and the willingness to serve that will enable you in our behalf to rise from our slumber, to acknowledge that there are dangers today, here and now, that threaten us, to help rally American people, to identify leaders who will come forward to define strategies, and to organize the human and material resources once more to lead the world toward a more stable equilibrium in the years ahead. That word equilibrium may give you pause, for it's not the same as victory. A term we used to use, in fact, in triumphalism 23 years ago, at a moment when the Cold War struggle between communism and freedom under law seem to have ended with vindication of the former and consignment of the latter to the well-known ash heap of history. Since that time, however, sobriety in the face of loss and the many evident measures of decline in our country have shaken us from our somnambulance. And finally, aggression in Ukraine 8 weeks ago has shattered the illusion that democracy and free enterprise would easily be adopted by humankind. Yes, conflict, challenge, and aggression are back. And indeed, conflict, we know, will characterize the nature of your lives and human history for as far as the eye can see. Indeed, as one of our most noted current practitioners of geopolitics, Robert Kaplan, has recently noted, and I'm quoting, "As long as the world is ruled by imperfect men and women, some of whom will be evil, some of whom will be naive, and some of whom will be competent, yet unable to solve disagreements with other competent people, whose self-interest or national interest are simply different. But for all those reasons, conflict will endure." And I suppose you can take that as good news, for you will surely be fully employed. In the past few years, while here at the Institute, you have deepened your knowledge of history and your appreciation of the dangers and costs that are involved in trying to change the political culture of a foreign nation. You've experienced, in growing up, a misguided invasion of Iraq, in my judgment. And you've observed how hubris among our own leaders, can weaken our self-confidence and put at risk all of the gains of victory in the Cold War. We've learned at tremendous cost how the absence of American leadership yields a far less stable world. One only has to recall the awakening of the Arab Street scarcely 4 years ago, from Tunisia to Libya to Syria, beyond, and the chaos that followed without American leadership. The advance of Iran's nuclear program and its continued support of terrorism, from Syria to Lebanon and beyond, absent effective American leadership. The rise of China and its assertion of a more ambitious maritime policy that seems to rewrite the law of the sea and to be designed to deny access by foreign vessels that is guaranteed by law. And finally, the naked aggression by Russia against sovereign Ukraine. A first step, absent American leadership, toward the broader goal of restoring Russian dominance throughout Eastern Europe. With respect to the latter milestone of this Russian movement, various reasons have been offered for why President Putin undertook these measures, why he seized effectively Crimea and is threatening eastern Ukraine. One of them rests on the notion of paranoia, often used to characterize Russia. And indeed, it's fair to say that in its history, Russia has been invaded many times by Mongols, Tatars, Napoleon, Hitler, others. It's a fair point. However, today, clearly, no such threat exists to Russia's territorial integrity or sovereignty. To the contrary, the strength and readiness of NATO Europe has declined steadily since the end of the Cold War 22 years ago. A more likely explanation is simply he did it because he could. Again, he faced no resistance, regionally or from NATO. Other possible motivations include raw ambition, hubris, or simply because creating a foreign crisis provided a useful diversion for the Russian people who are facing today severe stresses at home, demographically, economically, and from tensions posed by Russia's ethnic minorities. Well, to quote from my favorite bête noire, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, what is to be done? The answer is plenty, Vladimir. And here are just a few of the steps our country could consider in order to begin to once more provide leadership and restore confidence among our European allies and beyond. To call immediately for a plenary conference of heads of state and government from all NATO countries to take place in Washington this September, at which goals would be established for the renewal of readiness among NATO forces. Such measures could include a commitment from the alliance to at least a 3% increase in defense spending NATO-wide over the course of the next 5 years. A step up in the pace and quality of exercises of allied air and ground forces throughout Europe. A possible renewal of a practice during my career of deploying American forces that, Ed, you'll recall, a Reforger, crested cap exercises that moved Americans in division sizes from here to Europe and back to demonstrate and make sure that deterrence was backed up. Such a gathering could also propose a United States, European Union task force formed to involve governments but also public-private partnerships to focus on the development of an energy policy worthy of the name, ultimately to provide alternative sources of primary energy for member countries so as to relieve the vulnerabilities they experience today from their over-reliance upon fuel from Russia. With respect to the Middle East, to call immediately for a summit of principles from Israel and moderate Arab states to focus on the development of ultimately a new collective security framework for countering radical Islamist threat in all of its dimensions, including counterterror, counterproliferation, and for moderating efforts toward the peaceful resolution of disputes between Israel and among other regional parties. Does that sound too hard? Consider the following. Just before you were born, that's not so long ago, our country was facing one of the most difficult periods, one of the most daunting series of challenges in the post-World War II period. It was characterized by the loss of a war, the Vietnam War, and an across-the-board unraveling of American military power, both strategic and tactical. The Soviet Union on the march, having established a prevailing influence in all of the 9 or 10 countries that John listed earlier. A domestic economy here at home in free fall, double-digit inflation, unemployment, and interest rates. At the time, otherwise thoughtful people were saying that the presidency was simply too big for one person, and that perhaps we needed 2 presidents, at least, to govern such a complex and daunting series of challenges. And then we found a leader. The leader who came to town and brought a new team with John Lanchowski, Ed Rowney, Ken DeGraff and Reed. And by the time he left office, he had restored the strength of our military, the very foundation of deterrence and the sine qua non of any hope for successful diplomacy. He had turned the American economy around and launched it on the longest period of sustained growth in modern history. It accelerated the collapse of Marxism in the Soviet Union, the end on the Cold War, and the first reduction in nuclear weapons in our history, for which you can thank General Ed Rowney largely. In short, overcoming adversity isn't easy, but we've proven it can be done, and we have done it periodically in our history. And indeed, it has been a consequence of the emergence of a new generation. Today, your generation, able to awaken us again and chart the way and provide the leadership to enable us to overcome the challenges that face us today, from the Middle East to Russia to the Far East. A grasp of what it takes to be a leader is perhaps the most important benefit you've gained here at the Institute. You've studied what it takes to lead. Simply stated, it takes the ability to define the problem, to understand geopolitics, and having defined the problem, shape a strategy containing the political, the economic, and the military dimensions of a solution, and then to organize the material and human resources to solve the problem, keeping the peace, deterring conflict, advancing the principles on which we were founded, advancing American interests throughout the world. Leadership will also require the ability to inspire confidence among our allies and the American people that you know what to do and that you're going to get it done. You are truly blessed, both by the time that you spent here at the Institute and by your birthright as Americans. You can do this. You will do this. You're Americans. God bless you.